Welcome to InfoStream, your daily current. Unsure what to listen to? Turn to us for today's headlines. Stay informed. US and Russia seek diplomatic solutions to the Ukraine-Russia war. Legal battles continue for Comey and James. Volcanic eruption in Ethiopia disrupts air travel and raises regional concerns. Pentagon investigates Senator Kelly over alleged illegal orders. Marjorie Taylor Greene steps down, prompting a replacement process. The BBC faces ongoing crisis and leadership challenges. The Trump administration adjusts refugee policy, causing concern. Flooding in southern Thailand creates a major crisis. Trump plans a visit to China following discussions with Xi. Trump orders a review of Muslim Brotherhood groups for potential designation. Tanzania cancels Independence Day due to election unrest. GHF concludes aid operations amidst controversy. The U.S. utilizes trade pressure on Europe regarding tech regulations. Canada and the U.S. resume trade talks after a tariff dispute. Bolsonaro is arrested, testing Brazil's democracy. Ukraine-Russia war. U.S. and Russia engage in diplomatic efforts amidst divergent peace proposals. Recent diplomatic efforts to resolve the Ukraine-Russia conflict have intensified, with meetings taking place in Abu Dhabi and Geneva, highlighting significant disagreements between the involved parties. The core issue revolves around divergent peace proposals, with the United States presenting a 28-point plan and Europe formulating a counter-proposal. This plan, heavily criticized by Ukraine and its European allies, includes provisions that effectively legitimize Russian territorial gains, specifically recognizing Luhansk, Donetsk, and occupied Crimea, alongside a frozen line of contact in Kherson and Zaporizhia. Furthermore, the U.S. proposal limits Ukraine's military to 600,000 personnel and prohibits NATO expansion or Ukrainian membership. Despite initial skepticism, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio described the talks as probably the most productive day we have had on this issue, maybe in the entirety of our engagement, signaling a shift in the negotiation dynamic. However, Ukraine remains fundamentally opposed to the U.S. plan, viewing it as a betrayal of its sovereignty and territorial integrity. President Zelensky emphasized that Russia's primary objective is to gain legal recognition of its stolen territories, challenging the established principles of territorial integrity and sovereignty. European counter-proposals, obtained by readers and confirmed by multiple European sources, differ significantly, advocating for Ukraine to not recover its occupied sovereign territory through military means and prioritizing negotiations around a line of contact. These proposals also remove specific clauses related to territorial concessions. Despite these efforts, Russia continues to insist on the recognition of its gains. U.S. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll held meetings with Russian officials in Abu Dhabi, while Ukraine's official also expected a meeting between Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump in the next few days. The divergent approaches underscore the deep-seated mistrust and vastly different strategic objectives driving the conflict. The situation remains complex, with both sides attempting to shape the narrative and exert influence on the international stage. The evolving nature of the peace talks highlights the ongoing challenges in achieving a lasting resolution to the Ukraine-Russia war. Federal judge dismisses cases against Comey and James amidst legal challenges. A federal judge has dismissed the criminal charges against former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James, citing concerns over the appointment of an interim U.S. attorney and the potential for abuse of the legal process. Judge Cameron McGowan Curry's ruling stems from challenges to the indictments, arguing that the 120-day period for an interim attorney's tenure was exceeded, potentially allowing for repeated appointments aimed at political vendettas. The core of the legal dispute centers on the appointment of Pam Bondi as interim U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. Following the dismissal of the previous interim attorney, Eric Siebert, Bondi was appointed, leading to accusations that the move was orchestrated by the Trump administration to pursue politically motivated charges against Comey and James. Judge Curry's decision hinged on the expiration of Siebert's 120-day term, which concluded on May 21, 2025, effectively invalidating Bondi's subsequent appointment. The judge emphasized the potential for abuse if the government could repeatedly appoint individuals for short terms to secure indictments based on personal animus. The indictments against Comey involved accusations of lying to and obstructing Congress during testimony in late 2020, while James faced charges of making false statements to a financial institution and bank fraud related to falsely claiming a property as a second home to receive a better interest rate. Both Comey and James have consistently argued that their cases were politically motivated, citing numerous comments made by former President Donald Trump calling for their prosecution. Judge Curry's ruling underscores the importance of proper legal procedures and the potential for abuse when appointments are made for short, politically charged terms. The dismissal of the cases highlights the ongoing legal battles surrounding the indictments and the scrutiny placed on the Justice Department's actions. The decision has significant implications for the future of these cases and the broader legal landscape. Ethiopian volcano eruption disrupts air travel, causes regional concern. A long-dormant volcano, the Haile Gubbi, located in Ethiopia's Afar region, has erupted for the first time in approximately 10,000 years, triggering widespread disruption to air travel and raising concerns across multiple continents. The eruption, which began on Sunday, sent plumes of thick smoke and ash high into the atmosphere, impacting flight operations thousands of miles away. Initial reports indicated the eruption was visible from satellites, with NASA images showcasing billowing dust clouds crossing the Red Sea and drifting over Yemen, Oman, and Pakistan, alongside its effects in India. The immediate impact was felt in air travel, with several airlines, including Air India, canceling domestic and international flights to conduct precautionary checks on aircraft that had flown over affected areas. Flag carrier Air India canceled several flights due to the volcanic eruption. India's Meteorological Department, IMD, stated that Delhi, experiencing severe air pollution, was unlikely to be significantly affected due to the ash's high-altitude drift. The Tullius Volcanic Ash Advisory Center reported ash clouds impacting Pakistan's airspace, prompting a warning from the country's meteorological department. Local residents described a terrifying blast and the smothering of grazing lands, posing a threat to livestock herders. The eruption's visibility from satellites and the resulting ash clouds prompted concern across a wide geographic area. The Haile Gubbi volcano, situated approximately 800 kilometers northeast of Addis Ababa, is part of the Erta Al Range, a zone of intense geological activity where two tectonic plates meet. The IMD predicted the ash clouds would rapidly move eastward. The eruption highlighted the rare occurrence of volcanic activity from this specific volcano and underscored the potential global impact of such events, referencing the 2010 Ajafjalaj Kul eruption. The article also briefly included a news item about a woman shot by Border Patrol, but it was not central to the primary story. Pentagon investigates Senator Kelly over illegal orders video. The Pentagon is investigating Democratic Senator Mark Kelly, a retired Navy captain, following the release of a video urging military personnel to resist illegal orders. The investigation centers around the video's assertion that threats to the Constitution are originating within the United States, prompting concerns about potential insubordination. The Defense Department asserts that all service members are obligated to obey lawful orders, framing the video as undermining good order and discipline. A key element of the investigation focuses on Kelly's status as a retired service member, which technically allows for a court-martial under established legal precedent. Multiple appellate courts have upheld the constitutionality of pursuing such action against former military personnel. The Pentagon's stance is that Kelly, despite his retirement, remains subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ. The controversy stems from the video's implicit criticism of recent military actions, specifically the deployment to U.S. cities and U.S. military strikes against suspected drug trafficking vessels in the Caribbean. These actions have raised concerns about the military's role in domestic affairs and the potential for abuse of power. Senator Kelly responded to the investigation with a forceful statement, highlighting his 25 years of service in the Navy, including 39 combat missions over Iraq and Kuwait. He emphasized the importance of service members being able to speak out against illegal orders, asserting his commitment to upholding the Constitution. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer condemned the investigation as an attempt by President Trump to use the Pentagon as a personal attack tool, drawing comparisons to autocratic rule. Legal analysts, including CNN legal analyst Steve Vladek, highlight the historical reluctance to extend military jurisdiction over civilians, citing Supreme Court rulings against court-martialing former military personnel. The investigation underscores a broader debate about the boundaries of military authority and the responsibilities of government officials in safeguarding constitutional rights. The potential for a court-martial raises serious questions about the balance between obedience to lawful orders and the protection of individual liberties. Marjorie Taylor Greene's unexpected departure and the road to her replacement. Marjorie Taylor Greene's abrupt resignation from her Georgia congressional district, following a bitter feud with Donald Trump, has triggered a flurry of speculation and political maneuvering. The shock announcement, occurring just 15 hours prior, has left her district in disbelief, with many residents expressing surprise at her departure. The situation has intensified the scramble to find a replacement, primarily led by Republican Governor Brian Kemp, who is obligated to call a special election within 10 days of Greene's resignation, scheduled for January 5th. Several candidates have already emerged, including State Sen. Colton Moore, known for his controversial past attempts to enter the State House, and conservative influencer C.J. Pearson, who immediately declared his intention to run, aligning himself with Trump's America First agenda. Democrat Sean Harris, who lost to Greene by a significant margin in the 2024 general election, has also entered the race, arguing that Greene had begun to address issues resonating with the district's concerns. The special election process will be complex, involving a primary on May 19th, potentially a runoff election if no candidate secures a majority, and a governor-controlled timeline. The district, a ruby red area with strong Trump and Greene support until recently, is now grappling with the uncertainty. Residents express a mix of surprise, admiration for Greene's defiance, and concern over the potential impact of her absence. The resignation has significantly tightened House Speaker Mike Johnson's already slim majority. The race to replace Greene is shaping up to be contentious, with candidates vying to capture the support of Trump's base and the district's conservative voters. The election's timeline and potential candidates are central to the political landscape of Northwest Georgia. The BBC Crisis Deepens investigations and leadership challenges continue. A critical culture, media, and sport CMSA committee hearing revealed ongoing challenges for the BBC following a leaked memo alleging bias and systemic failures within its editorial processes. The hearing, featuring BBC Chairman Samir Shah, fellow board members, and former executives, underscored the significant reputational damage and leadership instability facing the corporation. Key concerns centered around the handling of the controversial Panorama episode featuring a manipulated edit of Donald Trump's 2021 speech. Shah's testimony focused on acknowledging the need for improved responsiveness and a more proactive approach to addressing editorial issues. He admitted a delay in issuing an apology, citing disagreements among board members regarding the scope of the response. Notably, Shah revealed a 26-minute conversation with former Newsnight journalist David Grossman, highlighting a sharp divergence in opinion regarding the handling of the Trump speech edit. Robbie Gibb, a former BBC executive and communications director for Theresa May, vehemently denied accusations of politically motivated interference, asserting his commitment to impartiality. The hearing also exposed tensions surrounding the resignations of Director General Tim Davie and BBC News chief Deborah Turnus, with Shah expressing his desire for Davie to remain in his role. Furthermore, the investigation highlighted a serious editorial failure concerning a 2024 BBC Verify story about car insurance premiums, which was subsequently found to be entirely inaccurate. This incident fueled criticism of the BBC's fact-checking processes and oversight. Despite Shah's efforts to project confidence, the hearing did not fully quell concerns about the BBC's governance and editorial standards. The ongoing leadership instability and the revelations of systemic issues suggest the BBC faces a prolonged period of scrutiny and reform. The search for a new Director General is now underway, with a focus on restructuring the executive and ensuring greater accountability. The crisis underscores the urgent need for the BBC to restore public trust and demonstrate a renewed commitment to journalistic integrity. The Trump administration's shift in refugee policy sparks concern and review. The United States is undertaking a significant review of refugee admissions policies, primarily driven by concerns regarding national security and the integrity of the program. This action involves re-interviewing refugees admitted under previous administrations, particularly those from Haiti, alongside a broader pause in new applications. The move represents a dramatic shift from efforts to rebuild the refugee resettlement program initiated by the Biden administration. Central to the issue is the impending end of temporary protected status, TPS, for Haitian citizens, a status granted following the 2010 earthquake. This has triggered fears of mass deportations, with many Haitian families facing imminent separation and return to a country grappling with severe gang violence, displacement, and a deteriorated humanitarian situation. The UN estimates a tenth of Haiti's population has been displaced, and widespread kidnappings, killings, rape, and arson are rampant. The administration argues that previous vetting processes were inadequate and that the current system has been exploited. Despite this, critics, including refugee resettlement organizations like HIAS and Refugees International, contend that the re-interview process is a cruel and unnecessary tactic, re-traumatizing refugees and misusing taxpayer money. These organizations highlight the rigorous vetting procedures refugees undergo, including extensive background checks and security screenings, emphasizing that they are the most scrutinized migrants. The administration's focus has also shifted to reviewing the broader international asylum system, citing outdated frameworks and potential abuse. Deputy Secretary of State Chris Landau argued that the system has become a loophole, leading to mass illegal migration. The administration is simultaneously pausing pending applications for refugees to adjust their status and is considering halting the admissions of white South Africans who do not meet refugee criteria. The U.S. is tasked with conducting the re-interviews, with the authority to terminate refugee status without appeal. This action follows a period of reduced refugee admissions under Trump, with a temporary ceiling of 125,000 set by Biden. The overall strategy reflects a heightened emphasis on border security and a reassessment of the nation's approach to global refugee protection. Southern Thailand grapples with extensive flooding crisis. Severe flooding continues to devastate Songkhla province and surrounding southern Thailand, impacting over 2.19 million people across 17 provinces. The cabinet has declared Songkhla a disaster zone, facilitating the rapid deployment of relief efforts. 13 individuals have perished as a direct result of the flooding. The most affected areas include Songkhla, with 568 households impacted, followed by Nakhon Sathamarat with 21. The crisis is centered around Hat Yai, where first-floor buildings are submerged, and calls for assistance have been widespread. The evacuation order for the entire district was issued by Governor Rathesar Chichu due to historically high rainfall. Despite the impassable roads, Hat Yai Airport remains open, with airlines operating normal flights. All shuttle services between the airport and the city have been suspended due to flooding. The Army and Air Force are providing transport via trucks, while the Songkhla Highway Office is offering alternative routes. Passengers are experiencing significant delays and are seeking updates on travel arrangements. Rescue operations are being coordinated by the military and Navy, utilizing inflatable boats and helicopters. The Department of Disaster Prevention and Mitigation reports that water levels are declining in Surat Thani, while rising significantly in Narathiwat, Yala, and other provinces. The Meteorological Department forecasts continued rainfall in the lower south through Sunday, followed by a decrease. Numerous individuals are stranded, some since Saturday, highlighting the logistical challenges posed by the widespread flooding. Volunteers, including artist Nikor Naipal, Silachai, are assisting with evacuations. The situation is dynamic, with ongoing rescue efforts and a focus on providing aid to affected communities. The Department of Disaster Prevention and Mitigation continues to monitor the situation and provide updates on the extent of the flooding and the effectiveness of relief measures. The primary focus remains on securing the safety of residents and facilitating the delivery of essential supplies to those in need. Trump announces April China visit following Xi talks. Following a roughly hour-long phone call with Chinese President Xi Jinping, former President Donald Trump has confirmed plans to visit China in April. This announcement came after the two leaders discussed a range of critical global issues, including trade, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, the flow of fentanyl, and the sensitive topic of Taiwan. The call, which occurred nearly a month after a meeting in South Korea, has signaled a renewed effort to stabilize and improve relations between the two nations. A statement released by China's state news agency emphasized the importance of maintaining momentum and progressing based on principles of equality, respect, and mutual benefit. The leaders' discussions resulted in a continued positive trajectory for the China-US relationship, welcomed by the international community. Notably, the U.S. temporarily reduced a 20% tariff on Chinese goods, while China postponed its plan to implement new export controls for rare earth minerals. The primary focus of the call was trade, according to White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, who expressed satisfaction with China's actions. However, deeper geopolitical concerns were also addressed, with Xi Jinping reiterating China's position on Taiwan, asserting its return to China is vital to China's vision for the post-war international order. This stance has ignited tensions with Japan, a key U.S. ally, as evidenced by Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's warning that any Chinese attack on Taiwan would necessitate a Japanese military response. U.S. Ambassador to Japan George Glass has publicly supported Tokyo's position in response to China's perceived coercion. The reduction of tariffs and the postponement of export controls represent tangible steps towards easing trade tensions. Although significant challenges remain, the April visit is intended to further solidify these positive developments and foster continued dialogue on these complex and interconnected issues. Trump orders review of Muslim Brotherhood chapters for potential terrorist designation. President Donald Trump has initiated a review process to determine whether certain chapters of the Muslim Brotherhood should be formally designated as terrorist organizations, triggering potential economic sanctions and travel bans. This executive order, issued on Monday, directs Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Treasury Secretary Scott Miller to collaborate with the Attorney General and the Director of National Intelligence to produce a 30-day report. The report will assess the activities of chapters operating in Egypt, Lebanon, and Jordan, focusing on alleged ties to Hamas and accusations of destabilization campaigns impacting U.S. interests and regional stability. The Muslim Brotherhood, established nearly a century ago, is already banned in Jordan and Egypt, countries where its governments view the organization as a significant threat. The order seeks to expand this designation, potentially encompassing the group's global network. If deemed warranted, the U.S. would implement measures prohibiting support for the Brotherhood and impose economic sanctions on its members, preventing them from entering the United States. This move follows a previous declaration by the governor of Texas, which similarly classified the Muslim Brotherhood and the Council on American-Islamic Relations, KAR, the nation's largest Muslim advocacy group, as foreign terrorist organizations and criminal organizations, respectively. The Texas order also restricts both entities from purchasing land within the state. The Brotherhood's aims, historically, have included establishing a state governed by Islamic law, or Sharia. The group's activities have raised concerns amongst governments who view its transnational network as fueling terrorism. Recent actions in Jordan, involving arrests of Brotherhood members suspected of planning attacks, further solidified the U.S. administration's stance. This review represents a significant escalation in the Trump administration's efforts to counter perceived threats to national security and regional stability. Tanzania cancels Independence Day amidst election unrest. Following widespread election unrest and concerns over potential demonstrations, Tanzania's government has canceled the upcoming Independence Day celebration scheduled for December 9th. Funds previously allocated to the festivities will now be directed towards rebuilding infrastructure damage during the post-election violence. The decision comes amidst calls from opposition groups and citizens to gather and protest the alleged killings following the disputed election, with estimates suggesting hundreds of deaths. The government, led by President Samia Suluhu Hassan, has not yet released an official death toll, but has established a commission of inquiry to investigate the events. President Hassan secured a controversial victory in the election with 98% of the vote, a result widely criticized by the opposition as a mockery of democracy. Key opposition figures, including Tundu Lissu, who is detained on treason charges, and Luhaga Mpina, whose candidacy was rejected due to technical grounds, were unable to participate. International election observers have reported evidence of manipulation and a failure to meet democratic standards. The government's imposition of a 5-day internet blackout following the election further fueled tensions. Graphic images and videos depicting deceased Tanzanians have circulated widely, with media outlets verifying some as authentic. The government has criticized the portrayal as an attempt to damage Tanzania's image, asserting the country's safety. A commission of inquiry is being established to determine the truth of the situation. At least 2 to 40 individuals have been charged with treason related to the protests, though President Hassan has urged prosecutors to show leniency, and many have since been released. Prime Minister Mwigulu Nchemba appealed for unity and dialogue, urging Tanzanians to avoid violence and discuss pressing issues. He emphasized the irreparable consequences of returning to past unrest. President Hassan, who took office in 2021 following the death of John Magufuli, initially eased political repression, but the political space has since constricted. The situation remains delicate, demanding careful consideration of the Commission's findings and a commitment to peaceful resolution. GHF ends aid operations amid controversy. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, GHF, a U.S. and Israel-backed organization, has concluded its aid operations in Gaza following almost 6 months of activity. The GHF stated its decision was due to the successful completion of its emergency mission, having delivered over 187 million meals through 3 million packages. The U.S. Civil Military Coordination Center, CMCC, established to implement President Trump's Gaza peace plan, intends to adopt and expand the GHF's operational model. U.S. State Department spokesperson Tommy Pigott emphasized the GHF's role in facilitating the ceasefire agreement between Hamas and Israel. However, the GHF's operations were highly controversial. The UN and other aid agencies refused to cooperate, citing ethical and safety concerns regarding the organization's system, which involved channeling desperate Palestinians into Israeli military zones. The UN recorded at least 859 Palestinian deaths and 514 injuries, resulting from individuals seeking food near GHF sites, primarily attributed to Israeli military actions, including the firing of warning shots. The GHF vehemently denied any shootings at its sites and accused the UN of distorting statistics provided by the Hamas-run health ministry. Following the ceasefire agreement, the GHF aimed to operate independently of the UN and international humanitarian agencies. Hamas welcomed the closure, calling for accountability regarding the harm caused and the deaths of thousands of Gazans. Despite the ceasefire, aid deliveries remain insufficient to meet the needs of the 2.1 million population. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric confirmed that the GHF shutdown would not impact UN operations, noting that the UN had never collaborated with the organization. The ongoing situation highlights the challenges of delivering humanitarian aid to Gaza, particularly amidst complex political dynamics and safety concerns. The GHF's operations were marked by accusations of unsafe practices and disputed casualty figures, underscoring the critical need for impartial and secure aid distribution channels within the region. U.S. uses trade leverage to pressure Europe on tech regulations. Recent talks between the United States and the European Union have stalled primarily due to disagreements regarding the implementation of the trade framework established in July. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has asserted that Europe's reconsideration of its digital regulations is a crucial prerequisite for reducing U.S. tariff rates on European steel and aluminum exports. The initial trade agreement, which lowered U.S. tariffs on European products to 15% in exchange for investment commitments and increased access to American agricultural goods, is now facing renewed challenges. European officials were anticipating tariff reductions on their metals exports, but the U.S. continues to impose a 50% duty, expanding the list of affected products. Simultaneously, Europe seeks exemptions for goods like wine, cheese, and pasta, mirroring the recent Trump administration rollback for tropical fruits and coffee. The U.S. demands concessions on European tech regulations as part of this exchange. Lutnick emphasized the very important need for Europe to revise its digital rules to create a more favorable environment for American big tech companies. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer echoed this sentiment, stating that the U.S. requires Europe to follow through on its promises of tariff reductions before granting exemptions. The core issue revolves around a reciprocal arrangement, with the U.S. leveraging trade benefits to influence European policy decisions. The negotiations highlight a complex dynamic where trade agreements are not simply about tariffs, but also about broader regulatory landscapes impacting global businesses. The continued impasse suggests a significant hurdle remains in achieving a fully functional and mutually beneficial trade relationship. Canada-U.S. trade talks set to resume following tariff dispute. Recent trade negotiations between Canada and the United States are poised to restart, according to Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, contingent on when the discussions become appropriate. Carney's comments, made during the G20 summit in Johannesburg, indicated a potential resumption within the next 2 weeks, though he downplayed the specifics of his previous communication with President Donald Trump, dismissing it as a detail. The resumption follows a significant disruption in trade talks triggered by an Ontario advertisement criticizing Trump's tariffs. The advertisement, featuring excerpts from Ronald Reagan's 1987 address arguing against tariffs, was perceived by Trump as a direct attack on his economic policies. Trump maintains that tariffs stimulate American manufacturing and create jobs. Despite the initial escalation, Trump has refrained from implementing a threatened additional 10% tariff on Canadian imports. Canada remains the sole G7 nation without a trade agreement with the U.S., despite being a major trading partner. The U.S. has imposed various tariffs, including a 35% levy on all Canadian goods, with exemptions under existing free trade agreements, and sector-specific tariffs such as a 50% levy on metals and a 25% levy on automobiles. Ottawa is actively seeking to reduce these targeted tariffs. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre publicly criticized Carney's nonchalant approach, emphasizing the hardship faced by sectors impacted by the tariffs. The ongoing dispute underscores the complexities of the trade relationship between the two nations and highlights the continued tension surrounding U.S. trade policies. Negotiations are expected to focus on lowering the sector-specific tariffs imposed by the United States, aiming to mitigate the economic consequences for Canadian industries. The situation remains fluid, with both countries navigating a delicate balance between asserting their economic interests and maintaining a stable trading relationship. Bolsonaro's arrest, a test of Brazil's democracy. Brazilian democracy faced a critical moment as the Supreme Court ordered the preventive arrest of former President Jair Bolsonaro following his attempt to tamper with his ankle monitor. This action, unprecedented in its scope, underscored the considerable strain placed on Brazil's institutions during Bolsonaro's presidency and post-presidency. The arrest wasn't an isolated event, but rather the culmination of a prolonged confrontation between Bolsonaro's movement and Brazil's democratic system. Bolsonaro's actions, characterized by destabilizing tactics and the weaponization of the digital landscape, repeatedly pushed Brazil's institutions to their limits. Prior to the January 8, 2023, attacks on government buildings, a slow-burn confrontation, unfolded, marked by disinformation campaigns, threats against judicial figures, and attempts to undermine public health efforts, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. Over 700,000 Brazilians died, a preventable tragedy exacerbated by Bolsonaro's dismissive attitude towards the virus. The Supreme Court's intervention, including the authorization of investigations and the opening of cases against Bolsonaro, was largely driven by a polarized political system unwilling to address the escalating threats. This unprecedented level of judicial involvement investigating, authorizing raids, and ultimately sentencing and arresting a former president highlighted a fundamental imbalance within the Brazilian political landscape. The confrontation extended beyond domestic affairs, impacting Brazil's foreign policy. U.S. President Donald Trump's imposition of tariffs on Brazilian imports, initially a show of support, quickly faded. The Supreme Court's action served as a stark warning, signaling to all political actors that attempting to overturn an election would face serious consequences. Bolsonaro's arrest represents a crucial moment for Brazil, demonstrating the institution's willingness to defend democratic norms. While the system remains bruised and improvised, it has shown that the consequences of inaction would have been far more severe. The focus now is on accountability and safeguarding Brazil's democracy against future challenges. The Supreme Court's role is not merely reactive, it's a proactive defense mechanism, highlighting a system grappling with its own vulnerabilities and striving to maintain its integrity.